Let's return to 2 Peter chapter 1, 5 through 7. And to brotherly kindness, we will add charity. That is a very special word, charity. We're going to look at this list again. It begins with faith and it ends in charity. It makes a difference what we believe, doesn't it? I mean, we can't just believe anything and come out right. And so if we get the faith right, it'll begin to change us into who we ought to be, and it'll bring us to this idea of charity. Now, it's agape. It's often called love. I think I'll talk in just a minute why it might have been translated charity by the King James Version. But it's a word that doesn't really have a lot of use outside the New Testament. It's used outside the New Testament in ancient Greek, but not like it is in the New Testament. And I'll show you that in just a moment. But in the New Testament, agape, the noun, used 116 times. And the verb, 142 times. And then there's an adjective that's often translated beloved, like a beloved brother. Beloved, using as an adjective there. 62 times. 320 times in the New Testament. And looking at the Greek literature of the New Testament times, there's nothing like that used about this word outside the New Testament. It's used, but it's used sparingly. And yet in the New Testament, it is used abundantly. Now, we talk about three kinds of love here. Eros and a passionate love. You can think of that as a receiving love. And phileo, when it's talking about brotherly kindness, it's talking about brotherly love, a friendship, a sharing love, a reciprocal love, a love that we give from one and receive from the other, and it goes back and forth. But agape, that's a commitment. That's what this is. And it is a giving love. Now, I want you to remember that about this word. It's committed to giving good favor toward another, rather than receiving and giving even when there's no reciprocation to that. And if we'll remember that about that word, it'll help us understand some other things that are being taught, because we think of love sort of, well, a lot of time we kind of focus on the romantic aspect of love. And this isn't talking about a romantic aspect. This is talking about a decision, a commitment where we're going to give love. And that fits New Testament. Now, I just want you to think about some other things in the New Testament like that. There is the greatest among you will be your servant. Well, you usually think about the greatest as the one being served. Not in the New Testament. The servant is the greatest. Humble yourselves in the sight of the Lord, and he'll lift you up. Humble yourself. A lot of time we think about exalting ourselves. And Christianity calls us to humble ourselves. Well, there's other things like that in the New Testament that just doesn't fit the way the world thinks about things. It's more blessed to give than receive. And in the worldly sense, why, receiving is what we're after. But in Christianity, giving is what we're doing. And that applies to love. That's why this is the greatest love. It's a giving love. You might think great love is love received. But in the New Testament, great love is love that is given. Now, keep that in mind as we look at these passages. This is interesting in Vine's expository dictionary of New Testament words. There's two things here that I want us to note in what Vine says about this word love as it's used in the New Testament. He called it the characteristic word of Christianity. Now that is quite a statement for a man that was so interested in words. What one word describes Christianity? If you had to put it in one word, well, Vine put this together. He said it'd be this word agape, this concept of charity or love, the characteristic word of Christianity. And since the Spirit of revelation has used it to express ideas previously unknown, inquiry into its use, whether in Greek literature of the Septuagint, it throws but little light upon the distinctive meaning in the New Testament. This word is used and emphasized in a way in the New Testament that it is not outside of it. And that is significant. When you're trying to figure out what words mean in the New Testament, well, you look at how they're used in the New Testament, but there's a vast body of literature outside the New Testament, and you look at the word there, and that usually helps us understand its significance in the New Testament, but not this word. Because the New Testament uses this word in ways in new ways, in ways that you don't find outside the New Testament, at least on the emphasis that is given to that. And then later on, Vine will say it can be known only from the actions it prompts. Maybe that's why it's translated charity. I think of the idea of charity as love in action. Oh, sometimes we think of a feeling of love, but this is an action of love. And that's how this type of love, this giving love, is known and understood by what is done. And so we have this beautiful passage from Paul. Paul spoke a lot. He used this word probably more than any other writer in the New Testament, but that's because he wrote so much, but it fills his writings. But this is probably the epic or the peak of where he's using it in describing what agape is. Remember, a giving love that shows itself in action. And love suffereth long and is kind. Agape envieth not. Agape vaunteth not itself, is not puffed up, doth not behave itself unseemly, seeketh not her own, is not easily provoked, thinketh no evil, rejoiceth not in iniquity, but rejoiceth in truth, beareth all things, believeth all things, hopeth all things, endureth all things. You ever met anyone named Charity? I've heard of people that have that name, that their name is Charity. Put that person in this. Put the word charity there. Does it describe that person? Now do this. Put your name there. Would that describe you? Okay, just as an example, so I won't pick on anyone, I'm going to talk about me. What if I put my name there? Bill suffers long and is kind. Would I recognize myself? If I read Bill envieth not, Bill vaunteth not itself. I'd say himself. Is that Bill? Well, I would hope it would be, but as I read that, it starts humbling me. Put your name there. When you read this, is this who I am, if that was my name? I tell you who does have this. Put God's name there. We read in 1 John 4 and verse 8, God is love. And that's repeated a little further down in verse 16. God is love. John uses that twice. Now don't read it backwards. Love is not God. We do not worship love. What does it mean then, God is love? When I think of God, I think of power. God's power. His might. And he is so powerful and so mighty, and that's so much a part of God that I suppose you could say God is power. I think of God's grace. And God is so gracious, you could think, well, God is grace. But the Bible doesn't say God is power. It doesn't say God is grace. But when it comes to this idea behind this word love, agape, it does say God is love. It is so much a part of God's character that to understand God, we need to understand this word. He's so loved. He gave his only begotten Son. While we were yet sinners, Christ died for love. Greater love hath no man than this, than a man give his life for his friend. And yet while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. Love is so much a part of who God is that you can say, well, that just defines God. God is love. And it makes us think, could that define us? Could we be make such a commitment and have this giving attitude such that it could be said that we are loved? That just defines who we are. And we would want that to be the case, wouldn't we? Now, John writes this. John is sometimes called the apostle of love. And the reason he's called that is because of what he wrote in his epistle, 1 John. Now, I'm just going to reference all of these by 1 John. I didn't record the chapters and verses because I don't want it to interfere with what we're about to see here. But I want to show you how John used this word love in that epistle. And you'll understand why he's called the apostle of love. But keep in mind the kind of love he's talking about. A committed, giving love. And so we read in 1 John, he that saith, I know him, and keepeth not his commandments is a liar, and the truth is not in him. But whosoever keepeth his word, in him verily is the love of God perfected. Hereby we know that we are in him. You see how that's a commitment to God that shows itself in our keeping his commandments and what we do. He said, he that loveth his brother abideth in the light, and there's none occasion of stumbling in him. Behold, what manner of love the Father hath bestowed upon us, that we should be called the sons of God. This is the message that you've heard from the beginning, that ye should love one another. Hereby perceive we the love of God, because he laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for the brethren. You see how this love is perceived by what was done, by this action. Whoso hath this world's goods, and seeth his brother hath need, and shuteth up his bowels of compassion from him, how dwelleth the love of God in him? My little children, let us not love in word, neither in tongue, but in deed and in truth. Having the love that expressed by what we do. Here, beloved, there's the adjective. Beloved, it's not an adjective in English, it is in the Greek, okay? Beloved, so you probably say beloved one, describing that one. Let us love one another, for love is of God. And everyone that loveth is born of God and knoweth God. He that loveth not knoweth not God, for God is love. And this was manifested, the love of God toward us, because that God sent his only begotten Son into the world that we might live through him. Herein is love. Not that we loved God, but that he loved us. How do we know? Look what he did. And sent his Son to be the propitiation for our sins. Beloved, if God so loved us, we ought also to love one another. No man hath seen God at any time. If we love one another, God dwelleth in us, and his love is perfected in us. We have known and believed the love that God hath to us. God is love, and he that dwelleth in love dwelleth in God, and God in him. Herein is our love made perfect, that we may have boldness in the day of judgment, because as he is, so are we in this world. There's no fear in love, but perfect love chaseth out fear, because fear hath torment. He that feareth is not made perfect in love. We love him because he first loved us. If a man say, I love God, and hate his brother, he is a liar. For he that loveth not his brother whom he hath seen, how can he love God whom he hath not seen? And this is the commandment we have from him, that whoso love God, love his brother also. Whoso believeth that Jesus is the Christ is born of God, and everyone that loveth him that begot, loveth him also that is begotten of him. By this we know the love that we love the children of God, when we love God and keep his commandments. You can't separate this from an action. It's not that, I just love because I just care about them and don't do anything. This is a love that shows an action. And our love for God is expressed by what we do, not how we feel. There is a phileo love we have for God, but this kind of love is talking about what we do. And so we keep his commandments. We keep his commandments because we're committed to him. And this is what we are giving to him. So, when we love God, we keep his commandments. For this is the love of God, that we keep his commandments. And his commandments are not grievous. Now I want to go to Peter's use of the word, since we're looking at this list that Peter gave us. And here's what we find in 1 Peter 2 in verse 11. Dearly beloved. That's the adjective form. He said, I beseech you, strangers and pilgrims, abstain from fleshly lusts which war against the soul. Beloved. 7 times in 1st and 2nd Peter, Peter addresses those as the beloved. That is the attitude he has toward those to whom he is writing. The very fact that he is writing this to them is an exhibition of the love that he has toward them, the commitment that he has, that he's going to give to them by writing this epistle. 1 Peter 1 in verse 8, whom having not seen, ye love, in whom though now you see him not, yet believing, you rejoice with joy unspeakable and full of glory. Now don't take all feelings away from this, because it produces these feelings. But the real idea here is we're committed to him. We're going to give to him, even though we have not seen him. 1 Peter 1:22, saying ye have purified your souls in obeying the truth through the Spirit unto unfeigned love of the brethren. That's phileo love. That's that Philadelphia word there. But then he says, see that ye love one another with a pure heart fervently. You are committed to one another. That you give to one another. That you demonstrate that commitment by what you do for one another with a pure heart fervently. 1 Peter 2 and verse 17. Honor all men, agape, the brotherhood. Fear God, honor the king. 1 Peter 4 and verse 8. It's used twice. Above all things. Isn't that interesting? Above all things. This great concept of a commitment to giving by what we do for one another. That's above all things. And do it fervently. Above all things, have fervent charity among yourselves. The New Testament is not filled with those kinds of words. So when they are used, like that word fervent, we pay close attention to it. Above all things, have fervent charity among yourselves, for charity shall cover the multitude of sins. 1 Peter 5 and verse 14. Greet ye one another with a kiss of charity. That is a greeting of love. A greeting that demonstrates the commitment that we have for one another. And so here's our list. We begin with faith. It does make a difference what we believe. You're not going to be able to get to this charity if the faith is wrong. And so when we understand what God has done, that Jesus is the Christ, that he bled on the cross for our sins, and you see how he has given to us, we begin with that, and then we heap upon that, lavish upon that virtue, knowledge, temperance, patience, godliness, brotherly kindness, and then charity. That quintessential word of Christianity is to become that quintessential word of who we are as Christians. We give that kind of love. Well, that's how we've gone through this list of these virtues. And we're not going to be through here, because next I'm going to show why these things are important. He's going to say that if you do these things, you will not be barren nor unfruitful, and you will never fall. And we'll be discussing that in a future lesson after the gospel meeting, because it's still in the context of what these virtues are. This is how Christianity molds us. We think on these things, and dwelling on these things, we become what these things are. And that's what Christ wants us to do. Not just to accept him and believe on him. He will save us. But having saved us, he wants to perfect us and let us be that very image of God for which we were made. If you need to respond by being baptized into Christ, or if you have wandered away and need to return, we have this opportunity while we extend this invitation.